Good morning everyone. Buenos días a todas y a todos. Welcome everyone to this conversation. We are very happy to have you all here. My name is Natalia Caruso, the Director of Grant Making and Partnerships at MADRE, a women's human rights organization and feminist fund. On behalf of MADRE, I would like to thank RLS New York office for their ongoing partnerships convening these important conversations on Indigenous women's rights. I want to start this important event with many friends, allies, and partners from all over the world. But first, I would like to invite you to pick your language. We have interpretation to Spanish and to English, Spanish, English. So you could see in the globe, you could click there and select English or Spanish channel. Please let us know in the chat if there is any issues with the translation that we could fix as we go and engage in this conversation. We also invite you all to participate from wherever you are, your community, your home, in the chat, to put some comments and questions in the chat. We will try to do this conversation dynamic, bring the voices of partners, but also bring comments and questions from people joining us in this conversation. So thank you. And if you also are inclined to do so, we want to hear from where are you joining us? What's your name? What's the organization that you are part of? So thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. I want to start really thanking the partners, thanking the panelists this morning and the moderator for being here with us. We are at a moment of a critical advocacy to do around the contributions and challenges facing Indigenous women regarding free, prior, and informed consent. For many of you that know that particular instrument for advocacy, Indigenous women had been pioneers in advancing peace building initiatives, but also confronting some of these extractive industries and development of aggressive projects in their communities. So here we are talking about this particular mechanism for demanding their rights, demanding the access to natural resources, and demanding the right to their well-being and livelihoods. The theme of the Permanent Forum this year, and this is sort of the frame for this event, is Indigenous peoples' business autonomy and the human rights principles of due diligence, including free, prior, and informed consent. And we were discussing the importance and the relevance to come together to discuss the free, prior, and informed consent, what has been the translation for some of the advocacy efforts for Indigenous women leaders in their communities, but also what are some of still the challenges that these consultation processes, not always with consent, bring to the livelihoods, to the land and territories, and sort of the role that oil, gas, and mining projects and other mega projects place in the community, in the leadership, and in the autonomy of these communities. These extractive industries extract the resources, but also extract the knowledge and really minimize the opportunities for mobilization and for organizing. So here we are as organizations very much focusing on the rights of Indigenous women and girls. We stand in solidarity to advocate for their rights and ensure that free, prior, and informed consent is protected and upheld by member states and by business and corporations. So I want to thank once again all the speakers. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of contributions and a lot of lessons and a lot of solutions and alternatives to what is needed to ensure that free, prior, and informed consent is well implemented and that protect the rights of Indigenous women and girls. So thank you, everyone, again for being here. I want to introduce now to our moderator, a person that we have been walking with us at MADRE for many years, that we admire very deeply. This is Otilia Lushtekoti, and is an indigenous Masha Quiche leader and advocate from Guatemala. She was a member of the Country Historical Clarification Commission, charged with investigating human rights violations during the country's 30-year-long civil war. Otilia has extensive experience advocating for the rights of indigenous peoples at the local, national, and international level. She served as a member of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and she has played an instrumental role as an indigenous women leader at the international, regional, and local level. So it's our honor to have you moderate this conversation, Otilia. Muchas gracias. And I want to pass the mic for starting this conversation. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias, muy buenos días. Tengan cada una de ustedes, en particular, pues agradecemos a Madre como a Rosa Luxemburg por organizar este webinario en relación a las contribuciones y desafíos de las mujeres indígenas.
And challenges of indigenous women in relation to prior free and informed consent, as our sister, friend, and also fighting woman with respect to women's rights and the rights of indigenous peoples, as Natalia, our dear Natalia, has well explained this topic that is the theme of the 21st meeting of the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Peoples in the United Nations. This is something that brings many challenges with it. And we think that is something that will be ongoing in the United Nations and in the States, under this purpose of implementing international standards where women's rights and indigenous people's rights are truly considered. So a warm embrace from Mesoamerica and particularly Guatemala. Today is the day of the wind. The wind is the essence of the spirit of the universe. It is the vital essence. It is thunder. It is tempest. It's gusts of wind or the air that comes out of our lips, particularly when we are pronouncing beautiful words, such as when we say justice, when we say peace, or when we say love. Wind, for us, it's a symbol of observation and analysis at the essence of existence of human life and also living beings. So we want to salute from Mesoamerica and Guatemala, particularly on this 7th day, the day of the wind. So let us proceed with this webinar. And we have 3 outstanding women who will be developing some topics related to the progress, to the challenges, and to our recommendations to the United Nations with respect to this topic that is at hand, and quite particularly in relation to the respect of or upholding of collective rights of indigenous peoples. That's why we always remember that we are subjects of rights and or rights holders. And with respect to consent, prior, pre, and informed consent, this is about the free determination of peoples, and it's supported by several international instruments. And that is why we have governing principles for companies and for states for human rights compliance and enforcement. So thank you for your introductions, and let us start with our 3 speakers. We have Yaso, our sister. She's a Takali leader, an activist and scholar whose ancestral lands are in the Mustang region south of Nepal. Yasu has dedicated her career to bring visibility and legal recognition to the rights of indigenous women and girls in Nepal. She's a founding member of the National Forum of Indigenous Women, an organization working with indigenous women for empowerment and for advocacy for elimination of social, political, cultural, religious, and language discrimination. As I had told you, you will have 5 minutes, but I will first introduce all three of you so that each of you knows who they are. Luzbeidi Monterrosa Atencio is a young indigenous woman from Ekuru, Sijono, belonging to the Wayuu Nation in the Colombian, Venezuelan Guajira region. She graduated from the Wayuu Communication School as an indigenous communicator. She's part of the film and video sampling team of the Indigenous Peoples. She's a student of the ENAC National Film School and member of the communications network of the Wayuu peoples. She currently works as a photographer and filmmaker or videomaker at UNICEF Guajira. We have our sister Lucy Mulenke. She is an indigenous leader and defender from the Maasai people from Kenya. Lucy is an outstanding expert nationally and internationally on climate justice and rights of indigenous peoples. She has played a decisive role in United Nations conferences on climate change, promoting solutions driven by communities to face climate change, and advocating for climate change legislation to take into account gender questions, gender-related questions. She's executive director and founder of the Indigenous Information Network in Kenya. And it's an organization that works to connect indigenous peoples in Kenya and reinforce their struggles on human rights, as well as to defend grassroots women's solutions for climate change and the development of livelihoods. So we have this first discussion. We will open with our sister Yasu. So it's 15 minutes for this part. And I think we will first address some questions that we have prepared previously, and I think this can serve as a base to work on this. So first, why is free, prior, and informed consent so important, Yasu? And what role do women and indigenous women and girls play in the region, and what have you observed? And I will ask another question for you to ask or forward in your specific topic. Do you feel that free, prior, and informed consent should be a topic that should remain in the discussions with the United Nations if human rights basic principles are not respected by the companies and by the institutions in states? These are the questions I have for you, Yasu. Welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Natalia. And good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all the sisters who are participating in this meeting, conversation. And I would like to thank you, Madre and Rosa Luxembourg, for giving me the opportunity. And in Nepal, there are 59 indigenous peoples in Nepal recognized by Nepal government. And due to the 2015 constitution, the indigenous peoples, indigenous women are not the legal entity in the constitution, but it is a racist constitution, and it has the indigenous peoples are displaced due to the land grabbing. There are 12 national park, 1 life conservation, 1 hunting reserve, 6 conservation area, 13 buffer zone have been demanding with the government to obtain their free prior informed consent. For protected area system covers 23.39% of the total country's land. So you can see how our ancestral homeland has been grabbed. And the indigenous women and girls from hilly region, mountain region, and plain area, Tarai region and Kathmandu Valley, all are victimized by the oppressive development. There is no development justice in our country. So it has affected indigenous women and indigenous girls, and especially in Newar, indigenous people of Kathmandu Valley are demanding with the government and international investor to obtain their FPIC in road expansion before planning and implemented any plans and programs in the country. And also in Lomjung, the Gurung indigenous peoples, and also in Tanahu, in Tanahu, the Mogars indigenous people, Machi in Ramechhap, and Tharus in the Tarai region. The government and the international investors, such as European Investment Bank and Asian Development Bank, to implement project after obtaining their FPIC. But in general, indigenous women and girls regarding FPIC is nominal. Indigenous women have started making demands with outside project intervention by the private agency, private company, and business company and government to obtain FPIC before any outside intervention, but it is not in practice. Indigenous community women and National Indigenous Women Forum are not in stage to file case in the current court, including the Supreme Court of Nepal and international investor such as World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and European Investment Bank. So the development agency are also playing a very crucial, very bad role for the indigenous people in Nepal. So regarding the FPIC, the challenges in Kathmandu Valley alone, 150,000 Newar were being affected by the illegal road expansion project. Many of them are landless, homeless, and jobless, and have no food security. And also violence against indigenous women and girls, abuse, harassment, and their bond and affection, spiritual bond in their land and territory and resources, it has been evicted. And the government and international investors have no interest to effectively implement the free prior informed consent enshrined in the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People and also International Convention ILO 169. And instead, the government use excessive force against indigenous peoples who protest against development operation and the divide and rule tactics into within the indigenous peoples community. And also the legal team of indigenous women are also in stage of learning about complaint against development project implemented without obtaining FPIC from indigenous women and girls. And also it is a very critical situation in many regions. There is no full respect to FPIC is life, and its violation is death of indigenous peoples, including indigenous women and girls, in terms of collective way of life, collective rights, and collective way of lifestyle of indigenous peoples. And obtaining free prior informed consent, including indigenous peoples, land, territory, and resources, and also customary self-governance system and customary indigenous knowledge, customary laws and tradition, livelihood, language. It is directly related to our identity. And also there is no FPIC means lot of loss of our collective way of life, including land, territory, resources, and self-governance system, indigenous knowledge, skill, technology, practices, and traditional livelihood. FPIC is a part of parcel of autonomy, and both autonomy and self-rule are main component of self-determination. If none of these things are, then our identity is in crisis. So free prior informed consent is an effective means to fight against development aggression in indigenous people, ancestral homeland by the government and indigenous and international investor and private business company. They should stop criminalization of land, territory, and resources of indigenous people. And in our country, the role played by indigenous women and girls, now they are learning about their rights. Indigenous women and girls are learning about their rights, especially free prior informed consent. A national and international mechanism like UNDRIP, ILO 169, CEDAW, STG, they are learning about the international mechanism and how to pressure the government in their area. And also they are demanding the participation and the meaningful representation of indigenous women and girls in the local and provincial and national level. And they are the victim of, indigenous peoples all over the world are the victim of development aggression and globalization, that are militarization, and that is implemented without obtaining free prior informed consent of indigenous peoples, and they have started to be organized and have an organization among themselves and have dialogue, cooperation, coordination, networking among themselves, and also seeking legal remedies in the consultation with the IP's legal organization, such as Lawyer Association for Human Rights of Nepalese Indigenous Peoples and Indigenous Women Legal Awareness Group. So are learning with our legal expert. And indigenous women and girls are angry, but they we have hope because of our support from our, including our National Indigenous Women Forum, MADRE, and are in learning process to take action. And this way, we in Nepal, we have been collaborating, our organization have been collaborating with the local government and the central level government and concerned authority. And here you can see how during the COVID-19 pandemic, near the national park, Chepang indigenous peoples' houses has been burned and broken down by the military, and our brothers, they were affected and some died. And during in Kathmandu in the protest, how the police, during the protest, the police, how they harass the indigenous woman, our sister, she was injured and with the tear gas. So this type of thing are happening. And also due to the speaking of mother tongue in speaking during the protest also, they were arrested and beaten. So this type of thing are happening. So collectively, we, within our country, different indigenous women and girls organization, indigenous people organization, and non-indigenous with the collaboration with the non-indigenous people organization and with the help of the international sisterhood, we can make a difference and we can have a very good mechanism and strategy to fight back. The indigenous women and girls can fight back to ensure and stop the criminalization of our land, territory, and resource through free, prior, informed consent. Thank you. If you have any questions, then I would be happy to answer.
Muchísimas gracias, Yaso, con su intervención y
Thank you, Yaso, for your intervention. We would like now to invite our participants, our guests. If you have any comments, questions, as we said at the beginning, or if you have any remarks, please do write them on the chat so that we can prepare them for you to adequately respond to them. So we welcome our sister, Luz Beatty, please. You will also have 15 minutes and we'll have some questions ready to guide your presentation. First, why is this topic of free, informed, and prior consent so important, so relevant? What has been the role of women and girls and indigenous peoples in your context, from what you know, if we could talk about that? And a third question, from your point of view, is it necessary to recommend the creation of a binding mechanism to uphold international law and for FPIC to be essential for development projects to be developed with taking into account the identities of indigenous peoples, women and girls? This is some of the questions that you can develop. You have 15 minutes. Welcome. Good morning for all ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to Mayora Otilia for guiding us and for accompanying us in this space, and Yaso, who went before me. I believe we agree on the realities and the impacts on the territories. With respect to the first question, why is consultation FPIC so important? And that this is something that we've worked on in Colombia, because in Colombia, 115 indigenous peoples are recognized, which include the Wayu people, the people I belong to. We are located north of Colombia, and the processes that we've been working on from Chingacacicaí, we've been able to reach several territories and kind of be able to understand the context and the realities of the communities themselves with respect to these topics that we've been talking about in relation to climate change and the relationship with with the topic at hand today. And I think it's important because it's this concept that is leading us to truly have some spaces with the communities and think about the territory collectively. So how, when we sit down to talk with women, with girls, with young people, we start kind of thinking about the territory, trying to understand the realities and the issues related to exploitation in our territories. I think we're among the most affected populations because historically there have always been our leaders, men and women leaders at the forefront, but we do need a sort of collective space where we can all have a voice and a possibility of contributing, because in the territories, when we don't have these free, prior, and informed consent, we see that mega projects arrive, and together with these mega projects come armed groups and law enforcement agencies are also becoming part of this system, and they should be guaranteeing many things in these mega projects when they arrive in these territories. And it is these same groups that bring with them human rights violations for all the people in general. But we also say that women and girls are among the most affected, because it is oftentimes them who, it is them who have direct contact, and this drives the sexism and violations and against women and girls in the territories. With respect to context, in Colombia, we are undergoing a process related to the peace accords. And many of the among the communities we discussed that we did feel like a reduction of the impact with the peace accords, because it did go down a little bit. But the truth is, we're living through a reality where it continues to affect us. And this has been becoming worse. I mean, so we are thinking about the possibility of, are we going to go into that war that it was never over, or will things get worse? So concerns have been expressed in this respect, because this is not unrelated. The armed groups, forces, and violation of human rights, and the fact that it's all, it's happening across all indigenous territories in Colombia. Is it important to continue talking about this? Yes, it is important, because we have said that the spaces are there, and the state should be the guarantor of these spaces. But this doesn't happen. This doesn't happen in communities. There's no prior consultation. Understanding that communities themselves are the ones who know the context. They know what the roots should be when we talk about differential approach for the implementation of these projects that arrive in our communities. It is us who can guide the process somehow, but we don't follow this collective process, but rather they sort of start dividing communities, and they only talk to the person that is at the front. It's usually men who are leading this or who are showing their face as leaders, and we don't see that the communities are called upon or an assembly is called upon. I'm not saying that this is all the time, but most of the times it is so. So what this leads to is that oftentimes the leaders themselves take like a divisory position in the territory, and this makes us somehow fall victim to the internal conflicts within the territories. At the Wayuu territory, we talk about the territorial conflicts around us. So people don't see the territory as Mother Earth, or they don't consider it collectively, but other people start saying like, this part of the territory is mine, this land is my family's. So we start seeing some clashes, but these are some of the strategies of the entities that want to get into the territory and generate this kind of division. And they have somehow managed to do it. So it is necessary to continue putting this topic on the table on the worldwide public agenda, because we need to continue issuing this call, because this brings many impacts when we don't have the possibility of accessing information, because we talk about awareness from leaders, from women, from young people, elders who had gone before us to talk about this, but it's because we somehow have gotten interested in talking and understanding the realities of the territories, but our youth truly doesn't have access to the information. And this is one of the fundamental access for us to truly be able to achieve awareness and about these topics that are in the end things that affect us. Because if they were not, then leaders would not be threatened. I mean, this is another thing that we have in Colombia currently, which is leaders continue to die every day, be killed every day, because these are people who are talking about these topics, and it's not convenient for the people who are managing these businesses, because in the end, they are businesses, they are development businesses, but they don't truly represent development for us. Because in the communities, I think we agree on that with respect to and the fact that this does not represent development for us. They somehow continue benefiting from this, and they have some sort of purchasing or procurement power, and we who continue to suffer through violence, and we see poverty continue to grow, it is us who are getting the negative consequences of this. And it is us who truly don't have the possibility of talking about this, I think, of discussing this. So I think this space, or these spaces promoted by Madre and Rosa Luxemburg, are spaces that are important for us to continue talking, discussing, to continue coming together, and to continue learning. What should we be implementing so that human rights of our peoples are not continue to be violated, and what could be the strategies that we could implement to face this situation? So one of the strategies that I think we should implement is to continue coming together and thinking about some lines where we can continue working on the methods to continue discussing and defending our territory, because there's no guarantee. When you talk about these kind of topics, there's no guarantee for life to be respected. One of the main rights is respecting the right to life. So we should be starting from that, perhaps ensure the guarantees to be able to continue discussing the topic, ensure meeting spaces to be able to continue coming together, and to understand the magnitude of what it represents, having an awareness of FPIC and of what climate change represents. Also, I think we are aware to a certain extent, but the strategies that should be implemented are not being implemented. so that we can continue sort of thinking about ourselves and thinking about how we can contribute to this. So I think that's important to continue approaching this, addressing this. For me, this is a topic that should not be independent from other topics that are in the public discussion. It should not be treated independently. So about Colombia, we continue to see mega projects coming into the communities without this prior discussion spaces. So I think it's very important to think about this in a collective approach, ensuring the participation of young leaders and women leaders in all the spaces that may happen, may take place within the territory and outside of it. And I believe that international spaces have an impact or an influence in our countries. So I do believe that we should continue making sure that this is guaranteed by the state. Thank you very much, our dear sister from Colombia. You have presented your very interesting case, and after Lucy's presentation, we will talk about our conclusions. We want to welcome Lucy, and we want to hear about her experiences, not only from Kenya, but from around the world. So we are eager to listen to what you have to say, Lucy. A question that we're interested about is what can we women, Indigenous women, recommend for international law on human rights of Indigenous peoples to be complied with, particularly free, prior, and informed consent as part of the processes of consultation and free determination of our peoples? And why is this so important? And what has been the role of women and Indigenous girls in this scenario? Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Otilia, and thank you, Madre. Thank you, Rose Lusenberg, for inviting us all and for making these arrangements to have this discussion, which is very, very important for us. And as Indigenous women, it's very important because we need to keep on bringing these particular issues on the discussion table so that we can be able to make a difference. FPIC is something that we have discussed in different topics, in different forums, in different discussions, and we've had quite a lot of misunderstanding about FPIC, and at the same time, especially from the governments who misunderstand the whole concept sometimes, and some of them do understand. And so and also for the Indigenous people from different countries, understand it in different ways. And I'm saying this through my experience with the different international forums where we had to really work harder as Indigenous peoples and local communities, and especially with the Convention on Biological Diversity, trying to really emphasize why it's important to have FPIC, and especially when we talk about our natural resources, our resources like genetic resources, when we're doing a Nagoya Protocol, which is under the Convention on Biological Diversity, and this is about benefit sharing. We have also had different discussions on FPIC when we have mega projects like what Yaso was talking about, and also the young lady from Colombia. So it's very, very important. And I think also, Otilia, you have mentioned it in the introduction, why these issues are very important and why we need to continue discussing them, and also to continue making sure that it's understood very clearly, and why it's important for our self-determination and also for a human rights-based approach, which we want everybody to contribute and everybody to benefit and everybody to be able to have a voice when they are making any decisions within the community. Unfortunately, for us Indigenous women, we come from traditional communities, and there is no decision, or there is no way a woman can give a decision and approve it at the public domain, from the family level, even up to the community level. Most of the time they make their own decisions, and they also support their husbands and families to make these decisions at the private domain, behind the scenes. And when it reaches to the public domain, the man will stand there and say, this is me who has said it, and this is the community who has said it, and these are the leaders from the community. Yet at the same time, it's a question of the woman who said it at the same time. I just want to probably put in a few case studies to just make sure that I highlight what I mean. In Samburu, for example, we are working with women who really, the communities have got a very tight traditions. And the fact is, you cannot make that decision without, the men are the ones to make all the decisions, all their properties. And actually not even the Samburu alone, but also in other pastoral communities. They're the ones, the men are the ones to make a decision. If you talk about free prior informed consent, that is just a history of its own. That is just something you are talking to yourself about. And these particular women were able to buy, they were doing a bit of business and trying to gain some little money. And so they bought some cows that they wanted to bring them to their own home, and then they can be able to look after them and then feed them and then sell them again to get more money. But the fact remains that these cows got into in the community land and also in the community kraal. They no longer belong to the women, because tradition has it that every property which is there belongs to the men. And the men are the ones to make the decision for that. They're the ones to be consulted. They're the ones to be asked. They're the ones to make the decision. And that's what we are talking about FPIC. If you free prior informed consent, if you don't have you don't make a consent of your own property, you don't have land to make your own decision and make a consent when somebody wants to bring larger scale farming or anything, then you have no say in anything like that. So this is a scenario which is very crucial, and that is a scenario that made many of us to start creating awareness, starting to train Indigenous women to make sure that they know their rights. And another case also is a case whereby you find that those who are living in areas which are productive, like in Transmara, you find that there are women who do not own land. And so anything, they cannot make any decision, they cannot be able to approve anything in their own land because it doesn't belong to them. Even those who are widows, they are not able to make that decision. And so it's really frustrating, because it means these women cannot actually advance in terms of looking and getting their own money in making food for their children, and also to sell their livestock so that they can be able to buy and be able to bridge in terms of looking at funding and money that they need. So we had to go again through a vigorous training supported by donors, HIVOS and the Voice program, to make sure that at least the women can understand and can know their rights and can be able to make decisions. They can be able to make decisions of their property and have a say in what is decided in that. And they also need to be consulted, somebody has to talk to them. If you am the one who is making a decision, you have to talk to me so that I can approve that decision. So these are some of the examples which are really very important. And indeed, when you talk about what do we do and what do we recommend at the international level, and how do we make sure that the women continue, having, making decisions of their own. First of all, we have to make sure that Indigenous women part of the community and also part
Sí, ya se quedó paralizada, ¿verdad?
Okay. We're back. We had some audio issues.
No.
Is Lucy back?
Mientras tengamos la oportunidad,
Okay, so while we have the chance for Lucy to come back, let us continue with our program and opening up this space for questions. We have a small question from the chat, and we want to both Yaso and Luz Beatty to be able to talk in the meantime as Lucy tries to log back in. The question is then for Yaso and Luz Beatty. The question reads, how can you make free, prior, and informed consent have the strength, the value, and the weight that Indigenous women need facing the projects that threaten our lives and territories? Thank you. And so Yaso, you have the floor, and then Luz Beatty. Welcome, Yaso. I think you might be muted. Yaso, can you turn on your mic, please?
Could you repeat the question once?
Okay. Vamos a repetirla, ¿verdad?
Okay, let us repeat the question. So how can we ensure that free, prior, and informed consent will have the strength, the validity, and the weight needed by Indigenous peoples and women facing the projects that threaten our lives and territories?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the questions. The free, prior, informed consent, those countries which have ratified or which have adopted United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, or ILO 169, those countries who is party to, those countries need to, if it is ratified or adopted or not adopted countries also, to have any plan, policy, plan activities in the ancestral homeland of Indigenous peoples, they need to take free, prior, informed consent with the Indigenous peoples who reside in the area. So the government is the main actor to implement FPIC to the Indigenous peoples, and also the Indigenous peoples, Indigenous women and girls, they need to be aware of their rights and what are the international mechanisms that are available for us as a weapon to fight back, to reclaim our land, territory, and resources. And also, there is in United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 10 speaks about without the free, prior, informed consent of Indigenous women, the state or the development agency, they cannot forcefully take away the land and territory and resources of Indigenous peoples. So we need to be aware by ourselves, and we need to have a dialogue with the government and with the concerned authorities, local, national, regional, and we need to make our brothers, sisters, and girls very aware on their rights and what are enshrined in the laws and policy. But in our country, in Nepal, the most of our there are among 9 in convention and convention, 8 convention our government has ratified, but the implementation is very poor. and they are not accountable to indigenous peoples and indigenous women and girls in Nepal. And because of dam, hydropower, protected area, wildlife conservation, and we indigenous peoples in Nepal have been bonded labor, refugee, and also landless and no land ownership. And I can give you the example, the endangered indigenous people, 21 household, 86 population, their land, they are the hunter-gatherers. Now they are settled nearby the forest, but they don't have any land. And only for 20 years, due to our advocacy and lobby, government gave them 6 hectares of land. Now it is almost completed. Now 2 years left for them. Where they go, where they will settle, where they will have their livelihood continue, sustainable livelihood continue. So it is a very crisis everywhere in the country, from mountain, hill, and plain area of Nepal. Everybody is suffering. So actually, we need to have collaboration, cooperation with everybody, complement and supplement how to make effective free, prior, informed consent. And we need to work collectively and have effort among ourselves. Yes. And also to get rid away from all those discrimination, violence against indigenous women and girls, and suppression, oppression, subjugation, which we have been facing, the violation of our human right, collective right. Without FPIC, we lose everything, our identity. Whenever government or development agency, they want to implement any project in country, underdeveloped country, like, or developing country like Nepal, very small, but lot of diversity. So we are facing, so we need support of international brothers and sisters around the world. And also we want UNPFII 21 session, call upon our government to implement the FPIC strongly, to reclaim our land and to get our land territory back. So we need to be aware by ourselves. Thank you so much for your question.
Gracias a ti, Yaso, dado en que Lucy ya está.
Thank you, Yaso. As Lucy is back with us, Lucy, you had 5 minutes left to finish your intervention. So we'll give you the floor and then we will resume the question on the chat to give the floor to Luz Beatty. Lucy, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened with the network. It just went off like that. And what I was trying to say is that why it's important to recommend the question of free, prior, informed consent is that if we really have to participate fully as Indigenous women and girls, if we have to use a human rights approach, it's very, very important that this particular instrument, which has been highlighted and which is being used for many other activities, we Indigenous women need to be fully involved, and they need also to be aware. We have to train them. We have to really create awareness to make sure that they understand and they know what free, prior, informed consent is, because it's important that way. They will use this as a tool. They will be able to make decisions and they will be able to protect the lands and even play a larger roles in terms of decision making, especially on issues of land and properties which they belong and which they get, and they are supposed to have them in order to continue that circle of life. It's very, very important. And we also want to say that the governments, the international organizations, they have to recognize and really understand FPIC and be able to involve Indigenous women and girls in the process, not just to talk about it, not just to make instruments and then put them somewhere in the shelf and they are not implemented. And many people we have seen in the past few years, Indigenous people have been like the top of the agenda in different areas, in climate change, in terms of business, in terms of different issues. we really must make them practical, and it has to be something that has to be understood by everyone and well implemented. And our governments also have to know that we have to create awareness. We don't just have to finish there, but we really have to create awareness for everyone to be able to understand it. The other very important thing is that this has to be a continuous process. I like the way Mateo Rosa talked about making sure that this is integrated, it's mainstreamed in different activities. It's very, very important, because whatever we do, let's make sure that we have to FPIC. If we have to really promote human rights, if we have to make a human rights-based approach, FPIC has to be there, and the indigenous women and girls have to be fully involved. For us all, for RLS and for MADRE and other partners, I think we also need to document the success stories on FPIC. What has happened? How has these cases been successful? So that when we can use this as a tool also to be able to share with different key players, and they can help us in terms of even strengthening the capacity of issues of FPIC. So it's very, very important that we continue with the process, we continue working on it, and we also document and be able to share those success stories and have something that is tangible and that is really understandable by everyone. We thank the Permanent Forum for choosing this particular thematic area. We thank all those who have been having quite very interesting and very important discussions. Normally, sometimes some of them don't reach down on the floor, on the ground, but we have an obligation for us who are able to listen and able to work and discuss it, to take it down on the ground level. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for that particular hitch, which did not allow me to complete my presentation as I needed it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. We have a question. Before you got here, Lucy, I had already read it, but I will read it out loud again so that we can hand the floor to Luz Beatty and then to you, Lucy.
Okay.
Because just in case you have something else to add about the question. I think I can also read a very important comment that I received. I'm going to read it. It says, at the state level, indigenous peoples have a legal certainty or a legal foundation. And internationally, we also have international instruments in almost all in their legislation include free, prior, and informed consent for any project. But we have realized that we cannot continue in good faith or just trusting the bona fide intentions of people, because these governments are always threatening indigenous peoples and territories with their projects. And this tremendously affects the lives of women, youth, and children from indigenous peoples. So this is just a comment from some of our participants. And this is a very well-suited comment for the topic that at hand. So Luz Beatty, you have the floor. Couple of minutes with respect to the question, which I will read again. How can we make free, prior, and informed consent have the strength, validity, and weight required by women and indigenous peoples facing projects that threaten our lives and territories? Luz Beatty. Okay, about this question, I think it's something that has been mentioned, which is participation of women in these spaces. From my perspective, or in my opinion, there should be a guarantor or a space that guarantees and that truly shows. I mean, talking about Colombia, in Colombia, we have different spaces that include national organizations, local organizations, territorial organizations, and supposedly go through a process to achieve the dialogue and the agreements with the government. But there is usually no guarantee about the participation of women, particularly there's no equality with respect to participation of women and men. So I think there should be a space to guarantee this, to truly convey or gather the voices from the territories, because sometimes we don't have something where everyone's allowed to speak. But so because we have some regional, then territorial processes, then national process, then international process. So I believe that many times the voices get there, but although there is a participation of women, their voice doesn't get to the upper levels of these spaces. And I think we're among the most vulnerable populations. And there's also the issue of children and youth who should gain access to these spaces also.
A generar también.
So I think it's important to start driving this, because we can say that we have discussed these topics in the different agendas, but the truth is that we are failing to understand the importance of having necessary FPIC in territory. So it's, as I was saying at the beginning, the ones who have a voice, oftentimes these are voices that don't have the experience, the right experience of communities. And oftentimes it's achieved through sexist mechanisms or through machismo. And the perception that is left afterwards is
una percepción real debe existir.
It's not a true perception of there being a room for participation of the voices that have been heard before in the territories.
Okay. Can I answer, Otilia?
Luz Beatty, it seems we've lost you, so we will now hand the space to Lucy. Before Lucy speaking, there's another comment that I'm going to read. It says, "Thank you so much for highlighting the plight of Indigenous women. The aspect of free consent is very important to bring on board, since there are many challenges associated with decisions. For instance, in Kenya, laws on land don't take into consideration Indigenous rights." That's a very important remark. And Lucy, you have the floor.
Yes, I will continue with where our sister Monterosa was talking about. And I think one of the most important things when you ask about the question is, how can FPIC have the strength, value, and weight that Indigenous women and peoples need in the face of projects that threaten our lives and territories? As earlier spoken, that it's important to have Indigenous women in the decision levels. It's also very important to make sure that we have allies to help us be able to bring the issues on the table. Because as you heard, we are from traditional communities, and just like she has said that in Colombia, sometimes the women also cannot be heard, or even Yaso, she's indicated. So it's very important that we look our own allies. Even sometimes it's women from other communities who have got a better voice than we do. We use them as while we are learning and while we are pushing, so that when they bring the things on the table, then we can be able to push them further. The other very important thing is that we as Indigenous people, we have now to go further, to have research and to collect data, so that we can have very important points that we can be able to bring them on the table, and people can know that we are understanding and we know what we are talking about. These issues are very, very important. And as much as I say, it's very important to network and work as a collaborative institution, as a Indigenous peoples institutions, that we can be able to help each other and show our strength, so that we can make sure that whatever we bring and whatever we oppose and whatever we want support is very important. Because if we are divided as Indigenous people and we have other people, make take recommendations which we are not aware or we are not really supporting, then it becomes a problem. Because remember, our other side of the story is that if people see we are divided or we are not together in the community, then they will use that to continue, oppressing us. It's very, very important to make sure that we as Indigenous people are aware of these instruments and we can be able to push them and move forward. And also use the UN agencies that are supporting us. We have the UN Permanent Forum there. We have the special rapporteurs. And with these rapporteurs are the ones that we need to keep updating and making sure that they know what is going on within our communities in case it's a human rights abuses, in case it's a human rights defenders or anything. We really must make sure that they also understand and people understand fully about our work at the different community levels. And indeed, what really is oppressing women is the fact that they cannot make decisions, especially when we have mega projects, because sometimes they come and our men just approve the whole land to go. And then there is no even a single space to be able to farm and to feed our children, or even to get money to be able to get our children to school. And the more we are not educated, the more we have different problems of health and of all the other problems that we have, then we will continue always lagging behind. It's very important that we also work with the other instruments, like we other processes like the Sustainable Development Goals. Let's also learn to take these FPIC issues to other processes and bring our issues on the table, because that way people will hear from different directions and they will be able to know that there is issues on that. Today, I'm very happy that we can discuss this. Some years back, 5 years back, 4 years back, it was very hard for us to bring the issues of FPIC on the table and for the governments to understand. But now it's very, very important that we are doing it. Thank you, Otilia.
Muchas gracias a ti, Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy, for your intervention. Pretty aware of what we are living through as women and peoples and girls from indigenous communities. So we are about to finish. We're going to give each of you a minute to please give us a conclusion about this topic that we are dealing with in the 21st meeting of the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Matters. So I will give each of you 1 minute. 1 minute, Yasu, you have the floor. And what do you think about this topic that we talked about? Yasu, you are muted. Can you please unmute?
Okay, thank you so much. This free prior informed consent is very important for the indigenous peoples, indigenous women and girls all over the world. It is related with our autonomy, self-determination, self-governance system, livelihood, our identity. So without free prior informed consent, because the colonizer, the internal colonization and external colonization has affected us and the migration has taken place. And we are I already said, the refugee, bonded labor, and we are facing all this kind of problem in our country. So collectively, we can make a difference and make ourselves, as Lucy said, that there should be a training. There is a misunderstanding on free prior informed consent in the country, around the people, among themselves. So it needs to be clarified among ourselves, and we need to reach out to the grassroots level, in the village level. So the government is also accountable, and we as an organization and as activists also, it is a responsibility to go to the bottom of approach, not top down. No? So that way also collectively we can work with the collaboration and coordination with the government, the local government, provincial government, and we can go together with them and also have a media also. We can mobilize media also. And also, it is very important in Nepal, 125 caste and ethnicity, 123 languages speaking people. So we need to have many people don't our brothers, sisters, they don't understand Nepali caste language is the official language. So that way, there should be the language should be the plan policy or any activities work should be in mother tongue, given in the mother tongue, so everybody in the community can understand. So we need to give pressure nationally and internationally with the help of all the brothers, sisters around the world, so we can make a difference. And UNPFII also need to give our government the suggestion or give pressure how to implement FPIC in our community all over Nepal. So we comprise of 36.58 of the total population. We are the largest population in Nepal. So that way, collectively, we can make a difference. And with the solidarity, unity of everyone, we can go together and work together to ensure our right, human right, and collective rights of indigenous people through free, prior, informed consent. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, Yasu.
Thank you, Yasu. Luz Beatty, you have 1 minute.
Bienvenida. Bueno, me parece que no está. Entonces,
I think Luz Beatty has left us. So, Lucy, you have 1 minute. Please, if you can give us a small conclusion or your thoughts on this topic. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you. I think, first of all, is to say that this topic is very important and we should make sure that we follow up with the recommendation made in this particular meeting, both inside events and also at the plenary and so on. And we really need to work closely also with the permanent forum to make sure that the recommendations given by indigenous people are really taken into consideration to be shared with the parties, state parties, so that they can be implemented. I also want to indicate that there are quite a number of indigenous peoples organizations who have also attempted to write FPIC guidelines so that they can have them and they can be able to teach the communities and to build the capacity of indigenous people and local communities at the local level so that they can be able to bring them on top of the agenda and they can understand it. Let's try our best to teach others and also to share, because every issue is integrated. And FPIC is integrated to be shared throughout. We are still struggling to make sure that we have in our post-2020 Global Biodiversity Network forum to have the FPIC, but we know that if we all work together, collectively together, we can be able to make it. And thank you very much for this particular discussion.
muchísimas gracias a Yasu.
Thank you, Yasu, Luz Beatty, and our sister and friend Lucy. Thank you so much. I think we will now talk about some general conclusions with respect to such important interventions. I believe that these conclusions lead us to listen to the context in Asia, Africa, and Latin America with respect to the fact that the situation of indigenous women and peoples continue to face a system of oppression that has reproduced the colonial system for several years. Thus, we continue to see the doctrine of discovery with respect to land dispossession, knowledge dispossession, and the dispossession of art and culture of women. This has been expressed through the interventions of our sisters. And all these issues of dispossession violate the individual and collective rights of indigenous peoples and very especially indigenous women. So what is needed, according to the presentations and the comments that we've received and what has been discussed in other political spaces, we find that it's necessary to have training programs for capacity building of women in relation to knowledge of international law. And on the other hand, we need to strengthen the ancestral knowledge of the territory, of the land, and their own collective and individual rights, because thus they also approached or addressed peace and justice issues. If we truly want to establish a culture of peace and justice in the territories of indigenous peoples facing the, or with respect to the states or the states in relation to indigenous peoples, it is necessary to open up an honest, open, transparent discussion where no one has a head start. I mean, no domination, but rather open up these discussions to make it known that we are subjects of rights and we are peoples that have individual and collective rights, and that therefore our human rights must be respected. And that is why we demand the governing principles of human rights to be complied with by companies, corporations, governments, and states. Thus, I think we would be constructing harmonious peace among states and indigenous peoples, because when we talk about justice and peace, we do have it in our indigenous peoples from our ancestral times. And I think that having rights, being entitled to rights, truly reflects our conclusions today. We have also highlighted that free, prior, and informed consent is so important as a part of the free determination of our peoples. And this is written in the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This is under the Human Rights Convention. It is under the Convention on Eradicating All Forms of Racial Discrimination in the World, and it is also under Covenant 169 and other agreements. And in that sense, I believe that international instruments, women must get to know international instruments and participate in them. And it is also recommended for women. We all have the obligation of understanding how these international mechanisms of the United Nations work. And it's been emphasized. There was an emphasis made on the rapporteurs, and I believe that the function of rapporteurs here is to guarantee human rights, watch over human rights being respected and upheld throughout the world, because they are being violated with respect to this violent penetration of the states into our territories. So I believe that in this sense, we are also emphasizing on the fact that the participation of women is extremely important, because we are lagging behind with respect to these rights in many indigenous territories. And that is why emphasis was made on the fact that decisions should be made also by women and girls. And this requires training. This requires raising the women's self-esteem, and for the men in these communities to also start to understand that it is a human right of women to participate, to make decisions, particularly in respect of their land. And that is why we've talked about the fact that access to land titling is a right of women. Access to information for women is a right of women. On the other hand, and as part of the conclusions, we have talked about the coordination of platforms, of articulating different coordinations. Why do we talk about this coordination? Because we need to strengthen leaderships, we need to strengthen decision-making venues for women that are not there for thousands of women. Of course, those of us who have been part of processes for many years, well, it's logical that we also will keep that in mind. So free, prior, and informed consent, as was very well spoken by one of our sisters, has been misinterpreted, has been misunderstood. Free, prior, and informed consent is about free determination. So therefore, the agreement of a covenant 269 has been clear, both in its articles 3 and 4, 6, 7, and 8 of covenant 169. These articles are pretty clear about the fact that indigenous peoples also have a right to veto. I mean, free, prior, and informed consent also has its own characteristics with respect to free determination. So it's not just about violently coming into our territories and try to implement any development project, because it ends up being investment for the states, but it is no development for indigenous peoples. And that is why we need to tackle this international law strongly with respect to these provisions that I just mentioned. So in conclusion, I think we have treated free, prior, and informed consent with the importance it deserves. And as it has been well said in the presentations, this is a topic that is not only specific and important and transcendental for everyone, but it needs to be mainstreamed into each area that could eventually reach our territories and communities. And I think that thus we reach the conclusion that we will demand attention from the Permanent Forum in its recommendations. And that is why we are also recommending to follow the forum's recommendation and the recommendations on this webinar and others that might be coming in. This exercise is being conducted in other spaces, but the important topic is the creation of a binding mechanism for the respect, compliance, and upholding of international law that includes our rights as indigenous women, peoples, boys, and girls. So we want to thank you all deeply and for the interventions of our three sisters and for all your comments, remarks, and questions. Thank you so much. We've taken note. We have recorded it so that both Madre and Rosa Luxemburg can raise these recommendations to the Permanent Forum that is still ongoing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your participation. And thank you to all the participants and all the people who were here with us today. Congratulations, and let us all be our friends and allies with respect to what has been discussed today. Thank you all very much. A big hug to you all and have a great day.